Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. And we have an emergency live stream, or kind of our live stream for the week. As we've said in the past, if there's major news, we're going to just go live that day if possible, because this is a kind of a dead season for Star Wars news. And this is as big of a news topic, really, other than an announcement for a show that we could probably possibly talk about. So, the Acolyte season 2 has, from major trades, been canceled. It's not official yet in terms of Lucasfilm announcing anything, and we probably won't get some type of press release from Lucasfilm unless they decide they need to take action to clarify certain things. But there are a lot of things up in the air right now over there, and it seems like the Acolyte might be a casualty of the recent ratings that have been released from Nielsen and other ratings metrics. So we're going to talk about that, as well as the comments from Temuera Morrison about Boba Fett possibly not being in The Mandalorian and Grogu. We're going to talk about those two main topics. As always, send in your chats. This is your opportunity to ask us anything you want. These are the main topics, and I assume the Acolyte will be the dominant part of today's conversation for the next hour and a half. But if you have something else you'd like to talk about, last week we had some great discussions about film, other good discussions about Star Wars, anything you'd like to discuss, send it into the chat and we will try to get to it. First come, first serve. If you'd like to make sure your chat gets featured on today's stream and you are at the bottom of the chat, send in a super chat. It will bump you up to the top and it does support the show. So we always appreciate your support. And if on the same page, if you haven't liked the video right now, we have more people watching than have liked. Make sure you hit that like button. It really helps us out, helps us get out to more people and find new Star Wars fans to interact with on this channel. Subscribe if you're new as well. We do live streams every single week, regardless of what the news is, but we go live and allow you guys to at least ask your questions or send in your comments, regardless of if there's a big news story. So join us, follow us, and check out all the great content on our channel. But without further ado, let's get into the news topics for the week. So we're going to start as people start to pile in here to the chat throughout the first 10 minutes or so of the stream, first 5 to 10 minutes. We're going to talk about the Temuera Morrison story first. It did break first. And it is, as usual, a lot of people getting in an uproar over a very small comment he made about just not having heard anything about being in The Mandalorian and Grogu. Not necessarily that he won't be in it ever, not necessarily that he won't get a cameo, but he hasn't heard anything about it. Sanak, what's your reaction to Temuera Morrison and Boba Fett not being in The Mandalorian and Grogu?
Yeah, it does definitely feel like a situation where actors who are contracted kind of have to keep a little quiet and mum about the role. Even if people don't like the Book of Boba Fett, we're not really big fans of the present day storyline, especially. I'm definitely a much bigger fan. I think Liam is as well, of like a lot of the flashback stuff that was leading into Mando season 2. The finale is whatever, it's fine. It's just fun kids' toys just brought to life. But yeah, I mean, it isn't really a show that you can look at and say, like, man, that deserves a definitive season 2 as we know it, right? Like, it just is a little weird. Even your main character is basically saying, does it make sense for us to be the leaders here on Mos Espa? Does it make sense for me to be the leader, especially? Right. And I mean, it kind of undoes the show in that way. And most people who end up watching it only really watch the Mando 2.5 episodes because it takes away a lot from the start of season 3. It takes away a lot of characterization that is very important for those characters. So this comment here has kind of been a thing that people have been like wondering and talking about. Tamora's kind of been saying it here and there, but he's at Fan Expo Chicago and people editorialized it a little bit online. It's not that he's like, oh, like, people's reception to the Book of Boba Fett has like really damaged the character and what Disney wants to do. That's how people were talking about it on Screen Rant and other kind of clickbaity websites. The truth is, he's like Liam said, he's being very coy about it, especially with Mandalorian Grogu. He's like, like, we'll see how it goes. What he's talking to and referencing more specifically about, like, I'm waiting for that call, is for the Book of Boba Fett season 2, right? He's very much emphasized, like, fans always come up to me saying how much they love my performance, want to see more of the character in another season of the show. He wants to lead another show, right? He's been talking in other interviews, like, just like Mando took 2 of my episodes, I want to go into his show and take that episode away from him, right? And make it my own, right? So, he's playful. This is his personality. This is just kind of how he is, and this is just the status of Book of Boba Fett and Boba Fett as a character. We don't really know what's going on. So I'm hoping the reason he's being coy, the reason why people have kind of blown this up is because, hey, we want to see him back and be more like Mando season 2 Boba. Want him to be more like that EU Boba. And he's been saying that, and people are twisting it, doing whatever they want out of it. But in truth, he might actually be getting ready for the Mandalorian Grogu. He might have already shot some time sensitive scenes or something. Like, we don't know for sure because, to be fair, last year there were rumors and pictures apparently of a Slave One being built up on set somewhere. They thought maybe it's for Mando season 3 or 4, maybe it's for Book of Boba Fett season 2. Now we might know that could have just been built earlier. Plans changed. Maybe it's in the movie now. This could just be like an Andrew Garfield just denying, like, yeah, I'm not going to be here. Like a Daphne Keene, like, I'm not going to come back as X-23. I didn't get the call. And then end up being rather significant, right? Characterizations and like extensions of the character that we've seen before. I think the movie would be perfect for Temuera to really like balance out the best parts of the Book of Boba Fett with the characterization that he definitely prefers from Mando season 2 that really excited him the first time around, that got people really excited during season 2. But yeah, it really is just like a we'll wait and see. It really does feel like the internet went away and kind of went crazy with this and editorialized it a little too far compared to before. The truth is, he might actually have already filmed stuff or getting ready to film something, and he's just got to be smart and coy about it.
Yeah, it screams typical Hollywood lying, his quote. It's the most basic thing. Oh, I'd really like to do it. I'm just waiting for the call. That is 101. We saw you and McGregor do it for 10 years. It's typical. So I think most likely he has at least a scene and he's, stretching the truth as of now. But even if he isn't, like, let's talk about a hypothetical world where he's not in this. I think that's a positive for a lot of people out there who are worried about Mandalorian and Grogu possibly being the worst parts of Mandalorian season 2 for a lot of people, which were the cameos. I still think most of the cameos are really strong parts of the show. If anything, Boba Fett is kind of the one that comes out of nowhere the most. Luke, I think, fits the story perfectly. I think Ahsoka fits the story perfectly. The Mandalorian stuff with Bo-Katan and with Boba, I think, are the two that don't fit the story as much. And I think Bo fits the story a bit more because she's connected to the Jedi in the past, where Boba isn't necessarily connected to the Jedi. But in general, I think if people were worried about, okay, we're going to get a Mandalorian and Grogu movie, but it's going to be every cameo you could ever think of from every Disney Plus show just to promote the Disney Plus shows and promote this universe, then I think if Boba wasn't in it, that's kind of one of your go-to characters. That if like a character of that prestige and that import to this whole universe is not a part of this, then maybe there aren't as many cameos as you would expect. So looking at glass half full, if you want to look at it that way, I do think that's a positive way of looking at the future of this movie. But I do think he's in it. I think he's in it for at least a scene. I'd be shocked if he's not. He is a character that is ripe for more storytelling and a character that certainly, if audiences worldwide who haven't seen The Mandalorian show fall in love with this movie and these characters, Boba is the perfect next step to spin off another character who looks very similar to the protagonist of this one, who could also lead his own movie, had original plans for a Boba Fett movie. Doing a Boba Fett movie just seems like an inevitable part of the future. And if they really don't have Book of Boba Fett season 2 in the works at all, then I think, I mean, why not save that story for a movie? I think it would work pretty well. So hopefully we do see him. He wasn't in Mandalorian season 3 though, so that's another thing that makes me think maybe he wasn't part of the plans for the future here. He says he would return for season 4. He was supposed to, something vague about that, but I don't know if Mandalorian really is the direction they want for Boba anymore. Yeah, they reestablished this character as a Mandalorian, and yeah, that's probably for the crossover stuff, but he's going on his own in his own direction, and I certainly would love to see that character regain his identity. So now let's talk about the big news. The news of the Acolyte season 2 not happening or being canceled after season 1. The big trades are reporting again, this is not news from Lucasfilm, so there could still be some type of announcement that this is not true. Or I think for a lot of us, there's a possibility that this could just be The Acolyte is canceled, but another show with a different title with these same characters or a similar story or a sequel show also gets announced. So there still could be a spin on it from Lucasfilm here in the future. But as of now, the big trades report it. Usually it's true. The Acolyte has been canceled, which does make it the first Disney Plus era Star Wars show to officially get canceled after a show or after a season has been released. We have had plenty of Disney Star Wars projects get canceled when they've been announced, but nothing that has released and then never gotten more. I think the only other thing, really, I guess we can maybe say is Solo. I assume they had more designs to make more Solo stuff. And then after the performance of the first one, we never got any more Solo. But Sonic, what's your reaction initially to hearing the news that the Acolyte season 2 is not happening?
Ultimately, I'm a little disappointment, but I can understand it, right? I think once I saw those Nielsen ratings start coming in for those later weeks, a little bit of the writing was on the wall, especially considering that this was 180 million, second only to Andor's like 225. And that's a show that definitely has longer episodes, definitely made better use of its budget visually in a lot of ways. But there were highs for this show that I really did enjoy, right? I do think that Leslie has a grasp of Star Wars that is pretty underrated, but I think her execution here was a miss for a lot of the stuff. And even the stuff that she explained and I thought was pretty solid, I would have preferred to have it on screen with like 2 or 3 minutes extra for each episode so these characters talk to each other, actually deal with the consequences of their action, deal with the twists that are going on. It's not that I thought it was like a horrible show by anything. It feels very bang average, which is a disappointment for what this show should have been like. I was also disappointed that ultimately this show was marketed as like a Sith-led story, and it's not really. It's about these twins that are not the most interesting parts of the show. It's definitely Manny Jacinto's Chimere, the Stranger, right? It is. Obviously having the Jedi and their institution and how it breaks down with characters like Soul, right? Lee Jung Jae's performance is very, very strong. It's unfortunate, right? And I think right now, one of the biggest things, especially with us reporting the news as it's broken out just like an hour or two ago, people on Twitter and a lot of social media on YouTube, are definitely upset or celebrating it. And, for the 8 weeks or 7 weeks that was the show was on for, I saw a lot of people who simply were enjoying the show, expressing their enjoyment, get attacked for that. I saw people who definitely were upset at people having criticisms. Some of them didn't have well thought out criticisms, that's fair. Some of them definitely did, and they still got, a little bit burned by a lot of the fandom's reaction. And this is a show that is admittedly one of the most diverse shows in Star Wars history, most diverse projects for sure. Seeing myself as a minority, I was happy to see a lot more representation kind of take the focus. But ultimately, I care about the story. I care about the execution. I care about where the story is going to really engage with me. And there weren't continuous moments of engagement for me. I enjoyed a lot of episodes, but I couldn't say that I enjoyed it any more than other shows, right? And those shows have their own issues, right? Mandoverse shows to me, as much as I enjoy them, they are really just kids throwing together all their toys into one basket and they're like, let's have fun with it. Let's blend it all together, right? This was a show that genuinely is in an era that I have a lot of love for from the books, from the whole initiative, and it didn't go as well as I hoped, right? It had all the makings that had people were saying all the right things. There was a writer's room to this, which I've been clamoring for all these Mandoverse shows to have. It just didn't turn out well, right? And it's not like we haven't had cancellations of Star Wars. Like Liam already mentioned, Solo was canceled. That got continued with the character of Kira in the last 2, 3 years with the comics set between The Empire Strikes Back. And obviously, Outlaws is going to feature her. We had the Clone Wars, which was canceled during the sale to Disney because it was expensive, funded out of pocket by George Lucas. It took a long time, but it finally came back, and a lot of its storylines were continued into Rebels, which was really fun for us to definitely appreciate after, not necessarily buying into that first season, a lot of us, and ended up becoming a fine show because of its original characters for sure. But this is just a casualty of like the streaming era and the casualty of like the streaming war and how massive an explosion it was from like 2018 to 2021. This is partly, I think, thanks to the Chapek era where projects were just announced and shoved out there to boost the value of the stock as opposed to really caring about the story sometimes. This is a show that I thought had all the right elements. It just didn't come together, and that sucks because I still want to see these stories continue. It has multimedia tie-ins coming. We know books are coming for it that are going to flesh out characters that are definitely more prominent in the first half. Does that mean that they're going to continue being expanded out? Have these High Republic authors bridge even more gaps that we have here in the 100-year gap? Are we going to have the story continued in books and comics, maybe a video game or something, to at least give us like some realistic depiction of them as opposed to just what's on paper and print? I don't know, but it's a little disappointing that streaming shows can't get second seasons at least to wrap up their story. Like there is a story that is wrapped up here, but I thought the most interesting threads that the second half of the season really was going for, even if you cut back the budget, even if you spun it off into a different show, if you made it a smaller focus, you could have had like a solid show for people. And it's not the case. And the online people who are just like exploding in excitement for it or attacking people, that's not cool, man. I just want to say that, like Liam is not a fan of the show. I'm mixed on it, right? But we've never attacked people. We welcome people's criticisms of it, welcome people's optimism about it, but the people who are cheering it on, right? This does get me a little nervous because it's not just the how streaming is going, where like a show has to be an immediate success over its 7 or 8 episodes, and another season takes 2 years to come out these days, right? Like it's the wait is not already terrible these days for a lot of these shows, but now like a brand like Star Wars that is or like Marvel under everything under Disney is kind of cutting back, trying to focus back on the movies, trying to re-energize itself. While it looks fine on paper, Star Wars has always kind of thrived on TV shows since the late 90s, the early 2000s. That is where the richest storytelling has been. I just wish that it was at least completed with another season. You can make this into like an hour and a half long special presentation on Disney Plus just to at least get the threads out of the way to set up a sequel show, and I'll be much happier with that. It hurts a lot of people. I think it definitely does. It definitely sucks that this is the way things are going with streaming shows, but hopefully it is continued in a really gratifying way because I want to see that dueling no matter what. Like it was fantastic. I think it's really sucks to get the news on Manny Jacinto's birthday, which is also today. I know some people are also giving happy birthday to Ahmad Best, which is awesome, but someone's having a definitely a worse birthday of the two for sure. But yeah, it's a big mix. There's definitely a lot of people I'm seeing that are really upset. I hope everyone, takes it as even keel as we can, and hopefully, the shows, the movies continue the best parts of the show and give it like a real proper continuation in live action because, as much as I want to say Solo and everything is nice, it's been continued. Most people don't know that. Most people don't engage with that. Some people are
Right.
finding out Kira's alive because of Outlaws, and they've skipped some really great story for her. I don't want the stranger. I don't want Chimera's character. I don't want Vernestra's really strange and unexplored story to just be left to the books solely. I feel like at least give us like a Jedi Survivor esque game or like something of that visual fidelity to at least experience the important and meaningful threads of the story instead of just being like it's a money thing, right? And it sucks, but like yeah, it is the streaming era where it shows if they aren't immediate successes, it seems like now everyone's cutting back and going back to movies. This is what's going to happen, and because the Acolyte did not execute all of its ideas as best as it could have, it definitely makes it look a lot worse.
Right. And I think especially when you have seen what Bob Iger and Disney has repeatedly said they're trying to commit to again as they're moving forward over the last year and a half, it's the quality over quantity approach. I think maybe if you're just trying to stuff a streaming service, you do a season 2 of this show. But I think that for the most part, yeah, if you look at the numbers, in combination, I know Alex Vernald says, what do you guys think is the ultimate reason Disney decided to pull the plug? I think it's a combination of seeing the numbers drop so dramatically throughout season one. They return for the finale, but they do drop. I am a little surprised they didn't wait like a 6 months after this show came out to see if it ever has any resurrection on Disney Plus. That must mean it really is DOA, like nobody's watching it post show. And that's kind of surprising because it is a shorter, consumable show. Even shows with negative buzz around them often do bring people to
Right.
watch them, especially for free on streaming, right? Like Madam Web becoming one of the top Netflix movies when it came out, even though it is by far one of the worst movies I have ever seen. It is still people are still watching it to see what is this disaster, right? And Acolyte's not that bad, but if you have free access to something, you would assume that at least the views would be there. And that's what we kind of always said in our conversations and our reviews around the Acolyte is the reviews must or the views must be there, even if the reviews aren't the best or the fandom is divided. What's the viewership like? And so I think this is kind of confirmation that the viewership must have been pretty low because I think they would go into anything they think could get them views and subscribers. So either they lost a lot of subscribers immediately after the show ended and they don't think they'll get them back, or the views just have been disastrous post finale. And so I think it's one of those two things, really, for the most part. And I think it is the division. I think you see them going to the Mandalorian and Grogu, you see Deadpool and Wolverine, you see Robert Downey Jr. coming back. You can call it safe, but and it is in a lot of ways, all these decisions, but they're trying to unite the fandoms a little bit. They're trying to make people happy. And I think that's the number one goal of entertainers, really, when you're making something on that big of a scale. Sure, it's great to have an artistic vision, but ultimately, when it comes down to the dollars and cents, you got to make the audiences happy. And if the audience, especially the Star Wars audience, is very divisive right now, why spend another $180 million on another show, another season of a show that's just going to create more division and just going to can perpetuate this division amongst your franchise when right now you're really trying to find the next Mandalorian, the next thing that gets everybody excited about it. Sure, people might not like it, but there wasn't the hate for Mandalorian season 1 and 2 that is being out there really about almost every Star Wars show. So I do think ultimately it is just a numbers game and it is the direction they want to plan for the future. As for this show, I kind of, like you said, Sanak, I didn't really like the show at all. I was not hiding that from anybody on our streams. I want them to do better, and I feel like the only way they can do better is to hear voices like mine who say, "Hey, I usually love Star Wars, and this was just not for me whatsoever. I didn't think it was well made." And I think not that I would ever be happy for a show getting canceled. It means people lose their jobs. It means there's no, nothing moving forward. But I think ultimately, when you look at the direction of the franchise, if we can only get so many Star Wars shows, why have them waste $180 million on a show that has been proven to be one of their weaker ones instead of going for new ideas? We constantly call for new ideas. Why not try the next Acolyte and hope it's better? That's personally for me what I would say as somebody who didn't like the show and wants to look positively at this because I'm not really moved one way or the other. I'm not happy that the Acolyte season 2 is not happening, but I'm not upset because I didn't like the show. So, as somebody who's very neutral about this news, I think the positive way of looking at it is these resources aren't going to just disappear. It's not like they're not making Star Wars shows anymore. They're just going to go to something either new or something we already like. So that's going to be, I think, their approach, and I am kind of pleased about that. And we see a lot of studios nowadays double, triple, quadruple down on things that frankly people don't really enjoy just because numbers say that they should take those risks. I think this is still relatively a shrewd move if they are not trying to keep up this division, if they want to really go in a new direction, if they want to prove they want to go in a new direction. Why not start fresh? And that could be a fresh start with a Darth Plagueis show. Still could build off this show, but go into characters we know a bit better. Darth Plagueis, Palpatine, have some references to the Acolyte, like you said, fill it in with books. I think the one thing that's different between the Acolyte and with Solo and Kira and all that stuff is that era is inescapable, right? The Solo era, those characters, that time period, their presence on the galaxy, it's inescapable. We're always going to have Star Wars stories in the dark times in the original trilogy era. Unfortunately for the Acolyte, this show is in a pocket era of the Star Wars universe that doesn't get touched very often. So unless we really decide to explore this in more TV and film, I could see this just completely getting ignored. We'll see what the reception is to the book or the books, because I think if there's massive reception to those books, I think you could see the Acolyte start to find its home for its characters in book material. But like you said, it does suck for those people who did enjoy the show, because that means they probably won't ever get those answers in live action again. But I wouldn't put it out completely that you don't have some payoff in a separate show, because this is a rich time period. We've all remarked about how one of the more disappointing things about the Acolyte is that it's a show in such a rich time period, in a time period everybody really wants to see, and it didn't capitalize on that. I don't think they're just going to completely ignore prequel stories. Like, I think they're going to go in them again. They're going to dip their toes in the water again. It's just a matter of finding that right story and how do you connect the threads and ultimately tell what's going on here. But let us know what you guys think in the chat. We're going to get to your chats right now before moving on to some other topics we kind of prepared. I think we should run down some of these chats so they don't pile up too much. So keep sending in your chats. Let us know what you think of the Acolyte cancellation news. This is huge. It's
Yeah.
very big for Lucasfilm, especially, to have something like this come out, that something's canceled rather than just possibly happening maybe one day. So Skywalker's Academy says happy belated birth, or happy birthday, Kelleran Beck, Jar Jar Binks, and Ahmed Beck as well. He plays 3 characters in Star Wars. Yes, Ahmed Best's birthday. Happy birthday, Ahmed Best. And then I answered your question, Alex, earlier. And then Skywalker's Academy, I believe in reference to Temuera Morrison, says he's lying. I knew it. Amanda was in Boba Fett. They're friends now. Would they leave Boba on Tatooine? That's a good question. And I think there's a question to be posed here, that is Boba, like I said earlier, I'd love to see Mandalorian and Grogu, even if it's just a couple scenes, use that platform to help boost Boba back into the limelight, to get him some screen time, to get maybe a Boba movie one day. But can an argument be made that with Din and Grogu, let's say this movie is a massive hit, they now become film characters with cameos and shows. Is there an argument to be made that now Boba Fett takes over as the definitive Mandalorian on TV? Will that baton get passed to Bo-Katan? Because they're not going to leave a property with as big of a name as The Mandalorian, as big of a TV audience as The Mandalorian alone. It's going to come back in some way. How do they spin that off next?
Yeah, that is a strange way, right, to really look at streaming and its connections nowadays with IP to movies, right, in these franchises. It's new. It's an exploration that we've never seen before. So, it is it's going to be experimented. Um, yeah, you're right. Like Boba, no matter how you look at it, right? Like he was always kind of being set up to be a movie character, just like Obi-Wan was with his own trilogy of movies. Josh Trank at one point was connected to direct it, and then he had a very messy fallout from Hollywood, essentially get blacklisted. A lot of it of his own doing for sure. But yeah, once John Favreau kind of came on board, he had an idea for a gunslinger. Then that gunslinger Mandalorian was merged with based on Kathleen Kennedy's recommendation with some of the ideas Filoni had and the work that he'd already done with George Lucas and the very different, exploration of Mandalorians there in Clone Wars and their material from people like Karen Travis and all that. And what did we get? We got a great character in Din Djarin. He's not the richest per se, but, he's been fun. He's been frankly, the Boba of the modern age, right? He's had a little bit more niceness to him. It is the father-son journey that does transform him and make him softer and more thoughtful and considerate about the people around him. But he is starting off in like a much healthier space regardless. Boba's got a dark story in the EU. Like it takes really until he becomes the Mandalore for his story to become more about purpose and value and less about money and just killing whoever I've been told to kill and for the best money, right? So it was always going to be easier for Din Djarin to kind of become this popular character, the character that people latch onto, but it wasn't impossible for Boba to have been in this position, if not been the Mandalorian that we saw in the show. He's not, all right. But then we got to see the season two Mandalorian version of him, right, where he is still like kind of cold blooded, but there's that honor that Django has. A lot more of that prequel characterization and backstory is seeped into that character, and obviously Tamora played Django. And then we get Book of Boba Fett, right? And it's that question of like, okay, did he need to be daimyo? No, but that's a really cool way to end season two of Mandalorian, right? People are really excited for it. And again, I will harp on this. The flashbacks, the stuff with the Tuscans, those are really, really strong stuff, right? Like there is very solid justification and motivation for him to lead all these bounty hunters to give them a better life as opposed to just being used and thrown away and killed off, right? Like his conversation that he has with Fennec when he rescues her and they get Slay One back. It works if you just look at the flashbacks. It doesn't really work once you see all the present day stuff. And you're like, well, okay, Vespa Squad. Okay, why are the Huts here but not really involved? Why are the Pikes here? Oh, suddenly we're finding out that all these characters were killed off. Killed off a last minute appearance by Cat Bane. Like it was messy, right? And then like people are saying, like, is he gonna stay on Tatooine now that he's a daimyo? I don't know. There's also that whole question of like, well, why would you bring Cobb Vanth and put him into the Bacta and with like a robot arm by the seams of it, right? Like he's gonna be your quick draw sheriff again. He's gonna have something that's gives him an edge, just like the Boba Fett armor once did in Mando season two. Wouldn't it make sense for him with his good values, his morals, what he's done for the people of Freetown to like kind of be in charge as the main enforcer and let Boba kind of go out and do his things? I would argue that then that lets him be a little darker, lets him bring in the bounty hunters that he worked with before and try to reform them in some way and still keep the themes of the show of like improving oneself and like becoming a better version without necessarily becoming toned down and soft like he is in that show. I think it's an easy way to get him off planet, but then I don't know. The question remains: does it make sense for him to be someone traveling around anymore now that he's notorious and has the Huts watching him at all times? Should he have his own entourage if he ever does stuff like that? Does it mean that if we see Boba, we see like a gang with him, like and not just himself? Which I'd argue a lot of people want to just see him cook and kill and do all these crazy things. It's a tough question. I think it can be handled well, and I think that's where a show appearance, would let him stretch out and continue a lot of stuff in Book of Boba Fett. But a movie appearance could just be a little bit more classic characterization of the character without having too much weighing it down. I don't know. It's a tough one. I really do think it's a tough one. I think it can be handled well. I think Temuera Morrison likes enough of what he had in the Book of Boba Fett as a leader to still continue that thread. But the only way I would really, really love for him to stay on Tatooine is if he's like playing like a talent card kind of role, where he's more of an informant, where he's more connecting
Mhm.
pieces, passing things along to the New Republic as necessary or as requested by Din Djarin for this mission that he's going on. That's the only way I'd like to see him if we're gonna see him in the movie and he's not actively participating. But that's again still not something we've seen in the show itself that gives us any hints that he would pivot to that next. So yeah, it's a tough question. But I think movies will just play it smart and safe, get us back to where we liked him in season two, and then put him back into a Mando spin-off show where he can continue this with Bo-Katan and his Mandalorian culture and all these other Mandalorians that are now coming up into the galaxy once more.
And I think another direction they could definitely go to is with Carl Weathers now passed away. What do they do with this whole bounty hunters guild and the formation of that, right? If Boba wanted to go with a more noble direction, maybe he's more a part of that type of angle rather than being a crime lord. I still love the idea of Boba having his own fortress, his own castle, it being the remains of Jabba's castle. Like all that stuff is awesome. And I think the trappings of Boba Fett were so cool and there, but the ideology around Boba Fett in that show, I think, was flawed. I think what they tried to do and then completely backtrack on it, like you said, it made the show feel more hollow than it did by the time than it even looked by the time we got to the very end, when it certainly turned into a Mandalorian show, or at least an excuse to give Grogu back into Mandalorian season 3. So hopefully we see an interesting direction for Boba. I don't want them to double down on the like hero fighter with honor style that they went with in Boba Fett, but some type of diversion while still keeping a bit of that message, I think would make the show at least feel a bit more valuable. Because if they just completely get rid of that and now he's the most badass bounty hunter in the galaxy again, he doesn't care, he'll disintegrate you, that ruins all of Boba Fett, which if there's something to ruin, that's fine because it's already a very mediocre show. But excuse me, other than that, I would prefer to keep, at least for the canon, a little bit of what Boba Fett did, at least the trappings of what it is around Boba. I think that would be pretty cool. Anthony says, sorry for being late. I thought you guys only stream on Tuesdays. We usually do stream on Tuesdays, but this news was too big and it came out at a perfect time for us to where we were able to scrounge up a stream here for you all. And as we've kind of said in past streams in the off season, we have a date to stream, and it usually is Tuesdays around 7 p.m. Pacific, but that's not a hard and fast date. We will go live during the week at different times if there are big news stories to cover. And this one we felt was too big to ignore and wait a whole day for, especially because it was a time that worked for both of us. So that is why we are live today. If you guys prefer Mondays, again, I ask this every single week. Maybe I'll put a poll up here in the chat, but if you guys prefer one day or the other, let us know, because we really want to accommodate you, especially in a season where there is very little news and not much to really talk about in the world of Star Wars. Most of these streams turn into Q&A anyways, and we love that, and we prefer to talk to you guys when a lot of you can make it. We appreciate those who come every single week, but we do want to cater to everybody. So if there are people here who are like, Mondays are way better for me than Tuesday, or Wednesdays way better than Monday and Tuesday, let us know. We will try to accommodate that, especially when the news is slower. So yeah, thanks for that, Anthony. And then Anthony says, nice Godfather shirt, Liam. Thank you so much. Usually I go for Star Wars shirts, but today I was already wearing this and I kind of forgot to change before the stream started, but I think it looked good. Skywalker's Academy says, I like Padme more. It looks like she's looking at Mount Rushmore with Qui-Gon, Yoda, and some others in the Rock.
Yeah. It's a nice liquid blue shirt from the 90s, back when they were focused on Phantom Menace and some original trilogy shirts.
I'm not gonna lie, Skywalker's Academy, I was trying for almost this entire stream to figure out what you were talking about. And now that Sanak has responded, I now know
It
what it
finally
is.
clicked.
I was gonna say I have no idea what you mean. Okay. Anthony says, I'm almost not surprised by the Acolyte being canceled. I understand a lot of people didn't like it, but I don't think Cancellation was a good idea, because the fandom menace will just claim a victory. And that is happening online. And it is, unfortunate that the division in the fandom is in this place. But again, to re-echo my thoughts, trying to be, you guys know I'm not a part of the fandom menace, and I didn't like this show, but trying to be as unbiased as possible. I do think if we have X amount of resources for Star Wars, why use it on a show that ultimately the majority of people didn't like? I would say that's kind of a waste of time. If you're going, unless you already had the story in progress and in motion, this season wrapped up enough to where it is a semi-complete story. You could flesh it out in more things and expanded universe material later. I don't really see the need to continue something just because. But if the ratings were great and there was a financial reason, then it makes sense why you go with it again. But if the financial reasons weren't there and the audience was mostly divisive to negative, I don't think Cancellation is really that bad of an idea.
Yeah, and on the flip side, again, I am a little bit more positive, and on this channel, what Liam and I say hold equal weight, right? Like, you can see behind him, he's not someone who hates Star Wars. He has all the EU books and all of the canon books as almost entirely, right? So it's not like he's coming at it like one is superior over the other. He's got things he likes and things he doesn't like, and so do I, right? There are things about the EU that I really don't like, right? There are things about the canon that I'm just like, why did we go when we go in that direction? Especially if we're adapting stuff that can be made better. If you've already seen how things are going, right? So I understand that, the Acolyte being canceled, why it happened. It could simply come down to the metrics. I also can admit that, it was very disheartening to see starting in May, just people attacking stuff that were being said in like, one of the I saw a video where it was, like, they compared an old Natalie Portman interview, and it's, like, really nice and detailed. It's obviously on set when she's, like, really experiencing the character Padme in episode 2 and 3, and then a Star Wars Celebration live stage, of Jodie Turner-Smith, right, where she's just, like, reacting to people in the crowd and kinda saying, like, a quick few words and like, "Look how Star Wars has fallen apart. Now we've got idiot people doing these things." Like, that stuff like that is horrible to see, and it definitely there was a pattern. I mean, I don't think truly that only 18% of people on average on Rotten Tomatoes like this show. That's not how it works. First of all, it's like the 18% agreement more than anything than it is like 18% actually like it. But yeah, I do think there was a lot of people who saw some of the diversity, saw some of the characters, saw some of the interviews out of context, clipped, and went for it, right? It's not like it hasn't happened before in Star Wars. It happened with Obi-Wan Kenobi. It happened before with John Boyega. The moment people saw his head pop out of that sand in that teaser, they're like, people genuinely said, like, "Oh, why is the stormtrooper black?" And it's like, "What? Like, really?" Like, that's like, and that stuff is horrible. And we'll never condone that stuff. That's just not cool. But you know what? We will criticize things when they're not great, right? I still want, as someone who's a completionist, to have the story like fully completed in this medium, right? I will take an hour, hour and a half, even if it's like 40 minutes or something. Like if they can just get like a conclusion battle or something get thrown our way, at least the best parts of the show to wrap up the threads, right? With Chimere, with May and Osha, and if we have to, some early Plagueis stuff, right? But it doesn't seem like it's going to happen right away. It's a fast cancellation, and that fast cancellation after this continuous like debate back and forth about if the show is great or not, if the show deserves to be canceled or not, and it's finally happening. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a great look. It's also Manny Jacinto's birthday today. This is like the worst thing he could possibly heard on his birthday, which sucks for him because he was the best part of the show by far, right? So yeah, I do agree to some degree that the Phantom Menace is claiming victory because they always do, right? At the end of the day, it is the metrics that really make a difference. I will say though, compared to some of the other shows, there definitely felt like the Phantom Menace was like going at the Acolyte earlier, faster, harder than even Obi-Wan Kenobi and other shows that also had not such great value in production and writing and characterization. So that I think it definitely affected it. Did it affect it to the point that it didn't show up in Nielsen? No, I think that the biggest reason is that the show had such short run times. Nielsen collects collected minutes
Mhm.
viewed per week. The show had episodes that weren't really full episodes. Like episode 4 and 5 could have just been one longer episode, right? Episode 1 and 2, you could have argued to be collected, but it's fine. 3, whatever. 6, that was long. It was nice. And then 7 was like, okay, well, why is the flashback stuff that why are the flashbacks on Brendock the longest, yet also some of the least well thought out stuff? Like it's not the richest, it's not the best written compared to the other stuff that's happening in the present day timeline, which also had its flaws, right? This was a show that really didn't work weekly. You look at our old live streams, we talked about it, just doesn't work weekly for us. Even
Mhm.
though I enjoyed 4 and 5 and the buildup from 5, 6 onwards, right? I thought that was a good stretch 4 to 6. I also said, like, I don't understand why some of this was patched together like it had to be weekly, right? This could have been stretched out, especially with a budget of 180 million. This is a show that deserved to have people sitting down and talking to each other, especially Jedi characters who are known for doing that. So, yeah, it is frustrating, and I would say to people, just like, if you're seeing people like say, yeah, the fandom menace has won, and they're cheering it on, and you don't like that, just disengage from it. They're gonna always do that. It's gonna always be like that. But I will say there's definitely a lot of people who are upset and who are taking it out on like the Filoni verse right now, who are like, Filoni and Favreau are just gonna take another character, cameo it forever. We're gonna get a deep fake Luke for the rest of our lives because we can't get recast characters. And I can't say those people are entirely wrong. I do have some worries about those things happening now, like by being safe, by making things that everyone likes. Is that the safest choice to make for the safest version of the stories that we're going to get? Maybe, right? And that sucks. All right, this was a really interesting stab. If this show was more in line with what it's described as, which brings up a whole other topic of a lot of Star Wars shows not being what they're described as, right, in the years and months leading up to the show's release. If this
Right.
was closer to like a Sith-led story, more like other acolytes fighting against each other, I don't think it would have been canceled. I think there's a lot of like mixed messaging around the show, and some of the flaws in interviews and marketing definitely let the Phantom Menace take advantage. But at the end of the day, it just was cut weird, cut short, and the metrics just didn't carry the show further. I wish it was a little bit more up in the air for like another month or two, but within a month, it does seem like it's pretty telling that some of the Phantom Menace had an influence this time. They just didn't want actors or anyone else to continue, dealing with this, especially when we've got Skeleton Crew in December 3rd with kids.
Mhm.
We don't want these kids. Maybe Disney didn't want these kids to face the wrath of the fandom if we announce cancellation for the Acolyte, or like it's up in the air closer to November, right? That could have really hurt these kids, because then once that's like in the air, okay, what's next? Who's our next target for the Phantom Menace? It would have been the kids, and
Yeah.
it still probably will be. They're complaining about suburbs and space, and it's like, all right, well, should we protect these kids, or should we, as best as we can, or should we just let another show dominate how people are going to perceive kids that are really excited to join this universe for the first time, and who
Mhm.
probably aren't going to get another season if Acolyte is anything to be judged off of?
Right. No, for sure. And I think for those of you who don't know what the Nielsen ratings are, just look them up. Look up Nielsen.com. It is a compilation of streaming data from the past month. And so it takes a month for them to compile the data for each week. So we're just getting the data for the week of the 15th to the 21st, which is the Acolyte finale week now, or the week after the Acolyte finale. And it didn't even make the top 10 in that week after. So that's the stuff we're looking at. There's been a massive drop off throughout the show. If you look at those metrics, I think it's a little easier to understand than just purely us versus them type of conversations that are out there right now in the Star Wars fandom. And yeah, it's unfortunate that there's so many different factions and the fandom is so polarized that people are going to claim a victory for a show being canceled. It's not really a victory. It's just a business decision. They purely are not listening to anybody's agenda out there. They're looking at how do we improve our IP's reputation? So they're listening to the fans, I think, in some ways, because they're trying to improve represent the reputation of the show across the fandom. But ultimately, the number one thing, no matter what it is for anything ever in Hollywood, is how much does this benefit our business? And it is a business. Filmmaking is a business, especially if you work for the studio system. It's a business always, but if you work for the studio system, it's a business no matter what. Streaming is a business. Growth of streaming is difficult. How do they grow? They ultimately, their numbers, their analytics have decided that between fan reception and between streaming numbers, it is not worth doing a second season of this show. And I think you pretty much have to consider that just any of these decisions made from the higher ups, it's purely financial based. And that's not really trying to villainize anybody either. That's just how it works. It doesn't matter how many good shows have we seen canceled. Now, the difference is, I think, between the Acolyte and other things, obviously, one, the show can't ever get picked up by somebody else because it's a Disney owned property and show. Somebody could decide, hey, we'll make Disney an offer they can't refuse, and we'll provide the money for Acolyte season 2 and we'll get the profits, but we'll pay a leasing rights to Disney for the Acolyte and for this property, you could see that happening. But I think, why would somebody take that chance on something this divisive? Usually people take those chances on things that are beloved but just didn't have the numbers. I think the unfavorable response from the fans, especially, but the critics as well, ultimately will be the reason this doesn't really see the light of day for a while. Never mean Doesn't mean it can't ever happen again, but I think for the next few years you won't hear anything about Acolyte season 2. But to continue through the chat here, we have Skywalker's Academy says next week we'll hear it's back on, probably just a field test to give the Rage Baiters some hope. You never know. Things do change fast, but I think this is a pretty much a confirmation for this one. I don't think they would let this leak, considering the conversation around this show, if there was any hope of them bringing it back. And if it did leak and it was wrong, they will be out here tomorrow clarifying that that's not their intention.
Yeah, and it would be nice if we do get an announcement from Lucasfilm. They don't have to. They've never really done that before. But maybe things are different under Disney. Maybe they are more willing for press statements, press releases of that sort. I mean, like Liam said, this can come back in a different way. This can be repackaged for stronger storylines, threads to be secondary to a new story, right? It can always come back. People love and rave about Clone Wars season seven's last arc, at least. But people definitely loved Bad Batch being back. The idea that it can always be back. Yeah, and it definitely burns for more people because this is definitely one of the most diverse front-facing shows that Star Wars has ever really engaged with, right? You can say Andor or Diego Luna and all that, like, yeah, it absolutely did, but it started off as a movie, right? It was kind of like a one and done sort of thing. Um, it wasn't ever guaranteed to get a show, and I don't think anyone thought we'd get a show called Andor when Rogue One first came out. We're like, that was awesome, but that's just like a plot hole fix for that didn't necessarily need to be addressed from A New Hope, right? This is like a completely new thing, unbuoyed by basically everything around it, right? The only thing it's got near to it is kind of the sequels, not the sequels, the prequels, and then the High Republic books, which we still don't know the real end of so far with the story, right? We're still a year away from really understanding where the books are going to kind of wrap up, or if they are even wrapping up, right? Maybe things are changing on that front. Maybe now they're like, we're going to do books in between other book releases and not have clear cut phases, but bridge our way all the way up to the Acolyte now and make this something that's directly connected story wise to, at least buoy you up the show a little bit for people to maybe come back and rediscover it again, right? We don't know. It's tough. I know. I feel like it's sad to see that this is the one that gets the axe, and it's not because, oh, like, I'm just saying this because, like, oh, I'm see all these people who are very diverse backgrounds and all that. Like, it sucks, but I don't think it's simply because the show hasn't done well online. It really is just that the metrics of Disney Plus have been going down for a while. The streaming bubble has exploded, and then a show like this comes around that's been in development, that has had a lot of money. It's a hard decision, but you have to cut it in some ways because it didn't work out. It just was from a different time when streaming seemed like it was an endless opportunity, and no matter what, things would have been steady. I think the show, if you put it 2 years earlier, probably is a lot bigger ratings wise. Disney Plus is moving away from its shows. The MCU shows are being cut back too. It sucks for Acolyte, but there's a lot of factors here. It just, for some people, certain factors about how people look, who are involved in this production, the stories involved, the people who are not out of their jobs, it does look a little bad in that sense. But I really don't think it's like this was planned to be the one cut. It's just how the cards were dealt.
Yeah, it is, and it's unfortunate. But I think the direction they're going is they've been very clear on trying to trim out things that are divisive and try to unite people in general across all Disney properties right now. So that's their direction. I don't think it's too surprising. But yes, to clarify something, because I wanted to make sure what I said earlier was true, and it is. The week July 15th to July 21st is the week of the Acolyte finale. It came out July 16th. It did not make the top 10 that week in the finale week. which saw also The Boys have its finale, I believe, that same week or close to that, and that's
Yeah.
number one. So we're looking at these similar things. Yeah, The Boys has a lot more seasons, a lot more fans, but the Acolyte, a Star Wars show, you would expect to make the top 10 that week. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're officially hearing this. I think maybe they were waiting for those numbers. Or they already had those numbers. They were waiting for those numbers to go public. But yeah, I think that's the main reason. So ultimately, for those more measured fans that we have usually here with us, you can, no matter what people say online, that is probably the North Star for why this is happening.
Yeah.
To go back to the chat, we have Anthony who says, or no, yeah, Anthony. What do you guys think of the supposed kiss that Bo and Din Djarin shared in an outtake? Would you guys be down for a Bo and Din Djarin romance in Mandalorian season 4, or assume also Mandalorian and Grogu? I I don't really want that. I mean, first of all, they have a big age gap, which hasn't necessarily been a problem in Star Wars, but there's an age gap there that's kind of strange. And I just don't need romances between all the main characters. I could see it happening if they wanted to make Din now some like royal Mandalorian who's part people because people didn't like that he didn't become the Mandalore in season 3. Do they make him part of that now? But I think the struggle for power, that whole thing is over between them. I never really saw romance anywhere in that story being a direction they were going. So unless they course correct, I just feel Din works kind of better on his own. And yeah, they can give him a love interest, but right now his relationship is with his son, and that's what drives the plot. And so I think really where you would have a romance, now you have a father learning how to raise and love a child. I think that's your emotional hook of the show. You don't need a romance. But so I would be out on a Bo and Din relationship, but doesn't mean it can't work if they try it.
I don't think it would have made sense in season 3, right? Season 3, obviously, a good chunk of its starting story is told in Book of Boba Fett, with Grogu's return, what Mando getting the N1 and everything. And then season three's opening episode is a recap episode. Let's get us back on track, everybody. Like, let's mostly skip over Book of Boba Fett, but let's tell you, like, oh, what's going on with the state of the galaxy, state of Din Djarin's friends and allies, right? Looking back on it, was that really a full worth of an episode to be necessary? I don't think so. But it is a season that is trying other things out. It still is trying to do it. It's continuing Navarro plot with Carl Weathers, and it's already lost Gina Carano in that storyline. So now we're gonna say, okay, what are we gonna do with Grief Karga in this season? So it kind of has some things with pirate stuff. It definitely also is working the spin-off vein into the story of Skeleton Crew, one of the pirates who escaped after Gorian Shard and everything gets taken down by Bo-Katan. That takes 3 episodes there. The Mandalore stuff takes about 3 or 4 episodes. And then the finale stuff really, really starts kicking in. And yeah, that stuff is great and all. And that scene that he has with Bo-Katan, he's like, you know, you're honorable. I pledge myself to you, even if there's nobody else. Like, you can say that's probably the closest to like a confession or crush that Din Djarin may possibly have, but it really is coming from someone who's is confused as he is about his life, confused as he is about his identity, especially bringing Bo-Katan into a cult that for a little while he was a little wary about, but now is seemingly okay, or like trying to make do with and make good with again. You think adding romance into that is going to be helpful? Probably not. And I know we've heard the rumors about this kiss happening, but uh, logistically, where would it happen, right? We know that unlike season 2, we went kind of back to that season 1 vibe where there's no Pedro Pascal on set, right? Other than, and this one didn't even have him for like a shot where you can see him unmasked. We thought like every season we're going to get him unmasked one more time, and I was hoping for that, and it just didn't happen because the guy is busy, he's big, he's blowing up, he's had a lot of projects that he's currently filming. So yeah, I mean, if he had taken off his mask, if he was on set, sure, but if we're gonna make Bo-Katan and him connected royally in some way and have a relationship, you need to have him settled into that father apprentice, master apprentice role, right? Father and son role. You need to have him spend a little bit more time evening out some of his own issues with his identity between the Children of the Watch and just the Mandalorians under Bo-Katan now that they're merged together. And then you can still build it up. Really, the only time they spend with each other that isn't like dealing with like we have to reclaim Mandalore is that one episode where we get Jack Black and Lizzo, and they're like dealing with that whole separatist sympathizer plot line, and they have a fun banter. I actually do like a lot of what they have there, but I don't necessarily like the story around it. But if you need more time with them being normal to be, to I'd say before they can actually have a relationship, and this is not a guy who's ready for that. He needed to double down on what he knows already and what he's working towards, and that was always taking care of this child that has returned to him that he always wanted to be with. And the child choosing him, Grogu choosing him, definitely makes that a priority for him. Romance is on the table, but if we're gonna have multiple seasons or movies or whatever, it's gonna take a while. It's gonna take at least like another season's worth of stuff between them, I'd say, before that like actually comes to fruition. And is it necessary? No, but I mean, I don't think it would hurt Grogu from having like a motherly figure or another paternal figure, right? It
Mhm.
just I don't think this guy is necessarily the best at raising children, even compared to someone like the armor or anything, but we'll see how it goes. That's what really what the movie's gonna have to show us, like what is different from season 1 and season 2 of this relationship, and then the return in season 3. What are you going to make different under this apprenticeship now too? And I think if that show to movie pipeline transition happens smoothly and we get to see a lot more of that, then maybe that Bo-Katan stuff is on the table again.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those points. And for those of you who did see while Sanak was talking there, I put up a poll. Vote which day you would like to see these streams. I say it every week. Let us know in the chat. Nobody ever does. So vote there. Right now it's 50-50 between Mondays and Tuesdays. So let us know. I put 4 options. We don't usually like to do the streams on weekends, and most people can't make it anyways. And then, we're busier on weekends. So, yeah, vote for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And we have also reached the hour mark in our stream, which means we've got about 30 minutes left. So we will continue running down these chats first come, first serve. But if you want to support the show and make sure you get a chat on this week, send in a super chat. We always greatly appreciate the support, and you will get your chat bumped to the top. And if you haven't yet liked the video, please do that as well. Okay, so back to the chat here. We have Skywalker's Academy not for the Bo and Din relationship. I'm kind of with you there, Skywalker's Academy. Anthony says, I hope a sequel show that's years away happens. I think that's a higher likelihood. I assume you mean a sequel show to the Acolyte. I think that's a higher likelihood than an Acolyte season 2. It will be repackaged no matter what with a different name, or I don't even think the Acolyte colon something else. I think it would be something colon an Acolyte story, or tale of the Acolyte, or something like that, to connect it, if they even want to use that name. But I would think they probably wouldn't use it. Anthony also says, I believe your comment earlier, Seneca, about Leslie Headland's knowledge being underrated. He agrees. And Skywalker's Academy throws out the title Return of the Sith. That could be an interesting title if they were to go in the Plagueis direction. I think that probably, if you see the story picked up, I do think it's in the Plagueis direction. Now, whether they decide to make that like a 3 or 4 season show that ultimately has Palpatine in it later, I think that would be interesting. And they could start a little closer to the Acolyte timeline, have a little bit more of the aftermath of the Acolyte, and then continue into the Tenebris and Plagueis stuff, maybe. Or start with Tenebris and Plagueis, then continue into the Acolyte timeline, maybe give it a few years, 5 years or so, bring these actors back for a little bit more of that story wrap up into Plagueis' connection into the Acolyte, then continue further into the Palpatine stuff and ultimately end with the Palpatine stuff. I think that would be awesome. I would love to give that story its proper due, and I think a TV show would be awesome for that story. It does have 3 distinct acts that I think you could play into 3 distinct seasons of TV. But it's just a matter of how confident they are in the character of Darth Plagueis. Do you run that show without Palpatine in it whatsoever? I think just the name Palpatine, they would be a bit more confident if you had a Darth Plagueis show where Palpatine showed up in season 1, which would be the case if you did do a story just based on the book. Season 1, you'd have Palpatine show up maybe halfway through the season, and then ultimately his induction into the Sith would be the end of season one. You kind of show him age up in season two. But it would be interesting to see if they go in that direction. I do think it will be Sith related if they do.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it happens sooner than like the Clone Wars revival was. That took a while, right? Like even when it was announced in 2018, it took another 2 years before we actually saw it happen. Yeah, I would be very down for a Plagueis-led show. Is it marketable? I mean, I feel like you can, right? If you like use a lot of clips from the prequels, maybe some stuff from the sequels, just showing off other Darksiders, and they're like, who do they owe it to, right? And it's like Plagueis or something, right? Like, and that's where you can use the Acolyte clip of him, right? You can just build out that, and that's I will say I do really like the model in live action. I was pretty
Mhm.
impressed by it. It has that darkness to him, but it doesn't necessarily have him where he is at the start of the Plagueis novel, where he's a little bit older, before he starts getting poisoned and all those other things happening to him, right? It feels like a younger version that's just buried into his work of being as dark as possible. So I like what they did there. I really do like that. Um, if there is something that we can always take from animation, it's that animation always likes to try out models. We've also seen now Zeb was tried out in Mando season 3, and now he's going to show up in the movie. This is a great way to be like, okay, Plagueis next. We've got the model already. We can make something cool happen out of this.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would love it. Um, I don't know if I necessarily want it as like something within 2-3 years. I think if we're gonna have to take a break from the Acolyte, I want that High Republic to be finished and all the lead up into the season of Acolyte with the books and whatever else expanded out further, fleshed out in the next 2-3 years. Then once we've connected to the Acolyte, hopefully by that time we've got some stuff for the sequels, which I think deserves a live action show or some animated show to really flesh out post The Rise of Skywalker, or at least stuff leading into this sequels or during the sequel 1 year gap, right? We need to do something there. We've given its time to be less controversial to the Phantom Menace or whatever. Now's the best time to jump into it and get that like 10-year, like, oh man, it's really been 10 years since The Force Awakens came out. Some of that nostalgia
Right.
kicking in. If you do that and you're smart and you take the lessons of some of the failures of sequels, and then that turns out to be strong shows, a strong multimedia, then you can just apply it back to the Acolyte with its spinoff with Plagueis, right? And you can look at the Acolyte and reframe it as like a reverse Bad Batch, right? It's like a spinoff that led to the main show, as opposed to the main show spinning out into a smaller scale and all that, right? So that's how I look at it. I, but with the news today, I don't expect to hear anything useful or pertinent to it until the High Republic book stuff is for sure done and
Yeah.
for sure like stop, because we this could be affecting the books too. We know of two coming soon. Now it might become like here's a whole like Acolyte bridge series that we're gonna do for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think that would be the smart decision. Really iron out the end of this era. I mean, we hope that they kind of knew the direction maybe of the end of the era, especially when it pertains to characters who connect to High Republic, like Vernestra. And with Justina writing Vernestra's story, I hope that she was a part of kind of the direction they took Vernestra in the show, rather than it just being, okay, now's your time to come and clean up the character bits and make this transition, force this transition that you were never intending, because you're the one that created the character. So try to figure it out. We see that happen a lot. So I'm not discounting the fact that that probably is what happened, but I hope that she was involved with that discussion, at least with how they were taking Vernestra. And then Skywalker's Academy sends in a chat here, says the Battle of Jakku was introduced a few weeks ago. I love to see Luke, Han, Chewie, and Lando from there forward. Luke collecting artifacts and all. Yeah, I would too. I really want to see that story continue. I'm dying for them to just commit, and I think that will carry into the conversation we're going to have next with Anthony about my EU video that definitely got a lot of conversation going. But yeah, I want them to commit. Just commit. Is it going to be in TV? Is it going to be in film? Are you going to recast? Are you going to do this in books? Just commit. Tell these stories. We need these characters back involved in this story. It has. They have to be involved. They are the biggest people in the galaxy, and they are the fundamental pieces of this universe. There's no reason to keep ignoring them year after year after year. Just commit. If it's their future of these characters is in the books, so be it. If the future of these characters is deepfake, so be it. Future of these characters is recast, so be it. Just do something. And so, yeah, I agree with you, Skywalker's Academy.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually ever seen that super it's not a super chat, right? It's like a membership for 3 months.
Uh-huh.
So, very cool. Very different from I don't know what that means exactly, but appreciate it, Skywalker's Academy. But yeah, no, I'm really happy the Battle of Jakku is coming. We talked about it on a previous Beggar Canon Dispatch. Very, very excited that Star Wars Uprising is gonna be revitalized, right? Like, this is the thing that I love about Star Wars. It was a lot more commonplace under George Lucas of like, I'll continue, I'll flesh out things eventually, I'll just throw money at it, right? It's not really something Disney is interested in doing, even though they clearly do have the resources to make that happen. But yeah, no, it's nice to know that like we are getting that story. This is a great place to introduce stuff that can be used in the Mandoverse quite easily, right? We've gotten the Starhawks finally visualized, and outside of just like pictures, right, with the game, right? Star Wars Squadrons that is very underrated. It's a great flight simulator. I wish it had some more maps and some new ships and all that. I hope it gets a second chance, right? Fleshed out because that was a great way where we got to see the Starhawk really unfolded, and it plays such a big role in the Battle of Jakku, from what we know, right? You can then introduce like the E-wings that we saw in Ahsoka. Maybe you can see some of the next gen X-wings, right, that we saw uh, take place in the Resistance show. That's the T-85. So what is the leap between a T-65 to T-85? Is it the Resistance model or is it a model in between, right? Like there's a great way to build out like why we're going to stick with these classic designs. What are some ships that come in and don't succeed, right? It's a great way to just populate assets, right? And start them off in the comics, which has been a great place for a lot of ideas and characters to really come from in the first place. Yeah, I'm excited for that. Uh, I agree with about the casting. I personally prefer recasting. I just as good as Deepfake was, and you know, I'm not gonna deny it. I was so happy with how it looked in Book of Boba Fett compared to the Mando season 2 one, which I was trying to justify in my head, but it was never that perfect to me. Right, it looked very much like a early 2000s film or something, like Tron Legacy or
Yeah.
something. Um, but the Book of Boba Fett one looked great. But the limitation of it is that you have to have the exact right lighting. You have to do things within a small set. It has to be contained. It has to be controlled. Right. Even when you see Luke doing action-packed stuff, you're not seeing his face. Right. And I mean, this is an iconic character that Mark Hamill brought to life decades ago. People want to see his face and see him doing incredible things and feats and not have to like play around with movie tricks and filmmaking tricks. So a recast would be great. I don't know if I necessarily want the Graham Hamilton or whatever his name is from Book of Boba Fett. I know people are like, he looks exactly like Mark Hamill. He doesn't to me. And I still think you need it. Whoever you're going to cast should be more in the prequel era way of casting, where if you already have a predefined character who's already had strong amounts of performances, you should take someone who's a newcomer relatively, but has strong experience. I don't think Graham Hamilton is like this experienced actor. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think he's so experienced to be a body double just because that was his job that he could take, right? If you're such a great actor, you're not a body double, right? You're not that experienced. You're not getting the opportunities to be a star in a franchise like Star Wars, right? So I want someone who has like more of a Ewan McGregor, where you're like, he's got some great indie films under him. He's become a critically acclaimed actor. He can play Alec Guinness's version, just much younger, right? I'd like whoever steps in to have some solid level experience. And to that last point about Luke collecting the artifacts, yes, I want to see the High Republic stuff that has been really crucial to that. A lot of the Lore Santeca stuff to be fleshed out. That is super interesting to me. I think that could be something that you see these different eras of Star Wars, see these different eras of Jedi, and then you're like, how does that affect Luke? How does that affect how he's training and changing up his methods for his academy? Is there things that he discovers that build up into the eventual choice against like reacting to Ben and his nightmares and what he witnesses, right? If we see something that like gives him warning, gives him pause, add that to a list of things that you know it makes him hesitate with Ben, great, go that way, and then still flesh out all these different areas. It's also a great way to maybe work around some of the gaps between Acolyte and a Plagueis show or movie series, and then be like, oh, Luke discovered this from this Sith artifact or saw something about it, right? It'd be pretty cool that way too. So yeah, that's how I would look at Luke. I think that's a great part of the story that needs some time and care, but I do think the comics would have a lot of fun with.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something unique to Luke as well in canon. Something that would be interesting and different. He is a historian in Legends, and you see that a lot. I think mainly just to try to connect with all the retcons that were going on with the prequels. But he is way more of a historian in canon, very much so more letter of the law than he is spirit of the law in Legends. So I want to see all of that information uncovered and how he continues to push forward. Anthony next says, by the way, I was not trying to be mean when Liam talked about the EU being adapted. I knew you weren't. We were just having a conversation. I just don't think it should happen. One, a lot of young people don't know or even care about the EU. Two, there will be unrealistic expectations. And even if it's okay, the discourse would be so much worse than it is now. And three, I saw you put it a little lower. Where'd it go here? Three, why the EU cinematic universe should not happen is because it will just give more ammo to the fandom menace to beat the EU over the heads of canon fans who are blamed for killing Star Wars. I don't think you're wrong with any of your reasons, and I did address all of them in the video. They are possibilities, right? Like the fandom will be crazy if it's a terrible adaptation. But what I've always said on this channel, and it's one thing that I hold firm with with my fandom, I hold firm with everything, is why not try something instead of just saying it won't work? Just try it. If it doesn't work, then don't do it again, right? Like I don't need to see more Acolyte because I know it doesn't work, but I don't know that EU into canon doesn't work. They haven't tried it yet. I don't know recasting doesn't work because they haven't tried it yet. So that would be my response to everything you say. Yeah, none of it is wrong. And I think if it is successful, there will be kind of this division between canon and Legends. It would be difficult to continue both at the same time because people will be going for one or the other. It is highly possible that if the Legends cinematic universe succeeds and the canon one doesn't, that we pretty much drop it because financially it makes more sense for them to focus on what's successful than what wasn't successful. And I think what we see in the era of today with multiverse storylines, and again, when I say multiverse, Star Wars, this won't cross over. There's no crossover here. I don't want there to be crossover. Star Wars shouldn't have that type of multiverse universe. But we see that people can handle multiple storylines at the same time. You have right now going to be two Batman storylines going on at the same time. You have two Jokers right now existing. You have multiple versions of multiple characters. You have Robert Downey Jr. coming back as a completely different character in this Avengers versus who he was previously for 11 years prior to this Avengers movie coming out in a couple of years. So I think people is just the fact that right now we feel like we're kind of running in circles with Star Wars right now. The main things that identify Star Wars as Star Wars, right? The Hans, Lukes, and Leias, the Obi-Wans, the Anakins, the Padmes, we're not getting much out of them anymore. And when usually you see something rebooted or a franchise come back to life, it usually is clinging desperately to the remains of what was old. And Star Wars has kind of not done that. They had the old characters in the sequel trilogy. But other than Han, none of them were kind of the focus of the stories. Luke in the second one, but Han drove The Force Awakens into the reboot, right? And then Luke was the main character of The Last Jedi and ultimately doesn't have a stamp on The Rise of Skywalker. I think it's worth a shot. If they want to make money, they want to print money, there's a possibility to have Han, Luke, and Leia all on the screen again with recast and at least test it out and see if people like it. And again, it doesn't have to only be Legends. It could be in canon if they decide to go that direction. I don't think they should recast twice, but they've shown an unwillingness to recast in canon. So if there is only one avenue for us to get Han, Luke, and Leia storylines, I would like them to try this because those are characters that deserve more than what they've gotten recently. They don't their stories should be continued because they're part of the DNA of Star Wars. And so I would like to see these characters resurrected in that way, be part of Star Wars storytelling once again. And if they're unwilling to do it in canon, then I think this is a completely valid place to take those characters.
Nothing I can add there. It's not my video, but yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't hate it. I'd love to see some books that I really like get some sort of animation or something like as we've seen with a lot of fan animations on YouTube. Uh, I do disagree a little bit in the sense that I think a lot of people, when it comes to Star Wars, because it's so popular, there are people who can get confused, right? So it would definitely be something. How would you market it, right? Like, are you going to market it with like the Legends label up front,
Mhm.
right? Like, is that going to be part of the marketing? Like, this is not canon, guys, but this is really cool Star Wars that you should check out, right? I think that's the only thing I'd be a little wary about. But no, I mean, as a completionist Star Wars fan, as someone who loves both the EU and canon, I would love to see like, some love thrown that way. I don't expect it to happen is all.
Yeah, I don't expect it to happen either, but it is it's a possibility. It's an idea to throw out there. If they want to take it, run with it. Great. If not, it's just it's just a possibility for people out there. I think the main impetus for the video, for those of you in case you got confused, is I want those characters back. I think they need to be back. I think for Star Wars to kind of regain its place amongst the prestige franchises with large audiences, it has a massive fan base, right? Well, there will be people like us on the internet talking about Star Wars forever. But for it to regain its place amongst the MCUs or the Harry Potters, I think Star Wars it mostly is living off its love and nostalgia for its fan base, right? Telling stories about these characters once again, I think will be the main way they can try to bring back some of that nostalgia for a lot of people. But yeah, I knew I know a lot of people can disagree. That's just a feeling I've had recently. Anthony says this was the only place I was welcome during the Acolyte. Gave it a C plus or B minus. It had highs and lows that were bad. There were bad moments, but it had really high highs for me too. And then agrees less quantity equals better quality. Stream wars need to stop after Disney Plus came out in 2019. Excuse me. Everyone, Discovery and Paramount created their own streaming services. Yeah, and that's Disney Plus is one of the reasons that did start because they were the
Yeah.
first one to break away from Netflix. But and ultimately we got a lot of those reactionary streaming services because of the pandemic. I think if you don't have the pandemic, you see a lot of the streaming services slowly rolled out over time to perfect their services, perfect their products, give people what they want. But ultimately, you saw them all rush to 2020. Most of them weren't scheduled to come out in 2020. A lot of them were coming out in 2021 and they rushed them just to have something to capitalize on the fact that they were making no money at the box office. So
Yeah.
that's really what created the streaming wars. I think Disney Plus started that movement, but ultimately it was the pandemic that truly created it.
Yeah, and a lot of these are kind of going away. Like Paramount is dead basically. Its flagship show was like Halo to some degree, right? I know is it Paramount that has no, no, who has Star Trek?
It's
Uh,
Paramount, yeah.
it's Paramount, right? So then, yeah. So Star Trek just finished a lot of its shows. I know they've got Strange New Worlds going on, but Lower Decks got canceled, and that's a huge fan favorite that had pretty solid ratings, and it's animated in like a Rick and Morty style. They sold off a Star Trek show, a 3D animated one to Netflix that did really well there, and people finally are watching that, but no one was watching it because it was on Paramount, right? There's movies like Challengers that are critically acclaimed, but people are like, why is it on MGM Plus of all things? If that's still also owned by Amazon, why has it got its own service? and it won't come for like an extra 2 months, right? Like people are kind of sick of it, and I think everyone is noticing it. So now they're trying to package everything almost like cable again. So, but it's like cable with less ads. That's kind of how it's happening, you know. It's like the whole point of streaming was to get away from that, but it's happening again. You know, a lot of these prices weren't. There's no way it was going to happen, right? And I know people always like get on Netflix for raising their prices, and they kind of are continuously, but you know, their competition was like Disney at one point, being like, you can get ESPN, you can get Disney Plus, you can get Hulu for $5.99 for like a year, and it's like, what? Like, there's no way that makes sense. But it was a war, right? It was just undercut the competition, and everyone was like, okay, how much competition can there really be? Clearly, a lot less than they expected, because now a lot of them are dying. I'm surprised Peacock has turned it around, but it really came from live sports more than anything. Now that's why a lot of these streaming services are trying to bundle together to create their own live streaming service between
Mhm.
them. Like it's a mess, right? And again, that kind of comes back to like Disney Plus, Netflix, all these other than Netflix, right? Almost all the other services are cutting back on their shows, trying to put that shows and rework it into movies. Like Moana was supposed to be supposed to be a show. Now it's going to be a movie, even though it doesn't have the Moana-esque animation of the first movie, just because it's more profitable, right? There's not that much profit in streaming anymore. It was when nobody was in the theaters. Now again, it's like, yeah. And I mean, if we had like a Game of Thrones coming out every year, you can make an argument. But streaming has slowed down so much of CGI, so much of VFX, so much of availability for so many different actors and production teams. It's not happening anymore, right? And you could honestly say that wars are over and it's almost killed off streaming within like 5 years. But only the big guns that have these IPs and franchises can survive or have been out here longer, like Netflix. You're gonna see
Right.
a couple more surprising streaming services be gone or be folded into a bigger one very, very soon.
Right. No, you definitely are, and I think one of the things about streaming is people have realized that it's yes, it's a consistent income source, which everybody loves, and that's great. But ultimately, when you have more services, people the income source is less consistent. Netflix had a consistent income sources. There was no competition. Now Disney Plus has HBO Max and they have Paramount Plus, which is morphing and changing currently, and they have competition from themselves with Hulu. They have competition from Netflix. They have Peacock. You have so many random streaming services out there, and then there's the more niche ones like a Crunchyroll or a Shutter.
Yeah.
Um, People subscribe when something they want to watch is available. And so ultimately that's going to be the nature of streaming. It is box office esque in that way to where like you put a movie out in theaters. If people want to see it, then you make money. If people don't, then you make no money. That's just the way the game worked for 100 years, works now. And now you're seeing that same model coming to streaming because there's too much. People can't afford everything, especially with inflation. People can't afford every streaming service. And so you're starting to see them pick and choose a couple to have 24/7. And then the other ones, they'll subscribe when a new show comes out. And no matter what penalties these services try to put on you for canceling and re signing up, people always find a way around it. And ultimately, yeah, it's just, it is, you're basically you can't cut production on your originals because then nobody will ever sign up for your streaming service, but you can't keep spending egregious amounts of money because you don't have any guarantee that you're going to get a return on your investment, right? So half of Netflix's big hits, right? They're mostly things nobody's ever heard of and then just randomly explode on Netflix.
Yeah.
So I think you got to budget your content appropriately. You got to make high quality content. And if you do happen to find the next Stranger Things of Game of Thrones, then great, your service will explode for the runtime of those shows. But ultimately, it's going to be a lot of people crisscrossing because that's what the market is right now. And I think it's kind of ultimately going to stabilize there unless you can see these conglomerates work together. Like they did originally with Hulu. It was the five major studios all coming together to make one answer to Netflix.
Yeah.
And then everybody kind of got out of it. Now everybody is needing to do the same thing again. So these trends come and go, and 5 years it'll be completely different than it is today. So we have a few more minutes here, and there are a couple questions I definitely want to get to. So we'll go with yours, Anthony, and then I think we might wrap up with Ovier's because we did promise him that we'd talk about our favorite movies or movies to get into this week as well. So Ovier, we will get to your question, and then Anthony, we'll get to yours. And anybody else, I'm sorry we didn't get to yours. We'll try to get to them next week. We'll let you know that it's been close to 50-50 for the vote for the day this entire time. Right now, Monday's winning over Tuesday. We'll let you know next week. We'll try to let you know earlier what day we choose for streaming. Really, we only did this today because the news came out at 5:30 that this was happening. So it was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. So we'll definitely try to promo these streams more, and so you guys can open the streaming chat room so you guys can talk and send in your questions early to make sure you get your questions on the show. So sorry we couldn't get to everybody's today, but we will try to next week. So Anthony says, do you think YouTube should ban the fandom menace? I think they should, because it would help the discourse at least a bit. No, I don't think so, because it's freedom of speech. You might not like it, but it's freedom of speech. You can ban hate speech. I'm okay with them doing that, but I don't think they should ban YouTube channels who get promotion off of being negative. That's just the name of the game, unfortunately, and people do watch it. So it's making YouTube loads of money themselves, even if it bothers a lot of us, right? They make more money when more people watch. That's ultimately the game. They're not going to get rid of a whole genre because it will drop their profit line. So no, they shouldn't ban anybody who just, even if they are hating on Star Wars, but if they are, giving hateful messages every week, then yeah, they should have some type of punishment from YouTube. But I don't think nobody should be canceled or banned from YouTube because it's a platform for you to have your freedom of speech.
Yeah, and I mean, it's tricky because how do you define the fandom menace? Like, yeah, there are a lot of things that are buzzwords, things that are, gotchas and tags that really point out, like, hey, this is a channel. If it uses this type of clickbait title or this type of thumbnail, they're definitely going to lean in or invite these other channels that are a little bit more negative. Yeah, okay. I mean, fair, but not every channel ends up staying that way forever. A lot of these channels come and go, right? They fizzle pretty quickly. It's not as lucrative as it looks, right? There are channels that do succeed, come around and get bigger, but there's also plenty of these channels that started off like relatively normal. There's some notable Star Wars channels that were pretty normal for quite a while, and then they're like, didn't like the sequels as much as other people, or I did, and then people online were like, "Oh, that was horrible," and all this and that, and then over time, they changed, right? They changed their audience, they changed and chased what the money was for, right? And that became their primary source of income. So can you fully blame them for playing the game, the numbers game? Not really. It's unfortunate that it also has changed a lot of their content, changed their audiences, kind of skewed things. There's a real argument online with TikTok and everything, like how influencers are like promoting some really messed up things to kids when they're very young, and that should be looked into, and that's tangential or side by side with a lot of these channels. But in the grand scheme of things, the fandom menace is not like the worst thing going on social media. Like it's not fun, but it is a long-standing thing. We've had this in the forum wars of the late 90s with Star Wars into the early 2000s. We've had it over, just old classic mail from the late 80s, right? The people have always hated Star Wars, have always yelled about it, have always fought each other about it. It's just as the first time that you can make a lot of money off of it before you really couldn't, right? So you can argue there's a lot more authenticity to a lot of people who were spiteful or hateful because that's truly what mattered to them. The saddest thing is a lot of the fandom menace, as you can kind of call it or describe it, a lot of them, they aren't actually like that in person or off camera. They just play a character too, which is like that's harder because then you could, if let's say there's regulations or government oversight or something coming in play, They could just be like, I'm playing a character. It's satire. It's something else, right? It's a hard thing to nail them down. Now, could YouTube be better about like not pushing it into everyone's algorithms the moment they look up just like a fun Star Wars clip? Yeah, I think so. I don't want to see hateful spite every 3 minutes and have to like not recommend this channel again and again and again until it goes away. But that is kind of how social media is. All of social media right now is a mess, right? It used to be a fun place in the late 2000s, early 2010s for people just to congregate with their friends, share their photos and all that. And that's how a lot of social media begins. But then eventually it becomes money, it becomes a numbers game. It becomes algorithms that are skewed specifically to push things that owners of these platforms want people to see, or gives them the best return on their investment, right? Unfortunately, normal people like us can be swayed or skewed depending on our age, depending on our backgrounds, behaviors, and might not even realize that it's just the working of a random algorithm that's just had a few inputs put into it, right? And the Phantom Menace, how much of it is real? We can't really define that. Some of these people may just have been stuck in that hole for so long that they haven't had a conversation about Star Wars with other people in person in a decade, right? So yeah, it's a tough one. I know what you're trying to say, Anthony. I agree with you, and I think Liam definitely also agrees with you on a lot of these elements, but you can't stop them, right? Because it's hard to define them and it's hard to really understand where they're coming from unless you would have like a one-on-one conversation.
Right. And we're having a lot of problems nowadays in our world about what is free speech, what's censorship, all those types of things. I just don't think YouTube would ever go into something like that, right? Like they
Yeah.
would become the target of this.
Yeah.
So they're not going to do that. Obviously they have, every time we upload a video, when you put a monetization thing on there, they ask you questions about, does your video promote this or this, and there's a lot of categories, more than you
Yeah.
would think. But so they do try to vet it seems. But yeah, we can't just silence people who have different opinions, even if their opinions are we completely disagree with, right? So yeah, ultimately that's something that I don't think YouTube would ever do, and I don't necessarily think they should.
Yeah,
It's
the only
just
thing I would say is like the only thing you can really counter is teach kids from an earlier age media literacy. We're losing that a lot in our school systems because it's not a thing that people care about nowadays because everyone has a phone in their hand by the time they're one. But when we were
right.
growing up, we had computer labs, we had like specific ways of interacting with the internet. Like this was taught, right? And I'm sure kids who are older than us, adults that are older than us, also had that, if not even more so. It's a thing that kids generally don't know how to like type out things and do things that when we were bridging the gap between a physical and a much more digital led world became a thing to understand and learn from. Nowadays teachers will say use Wikipedia. I guarantee you when we were kids they'd be like, no, Wikipedia is horrible, anybody can edit it and change it and skew it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
They were warning us those things from like the start of doing history reports. But that's not necessarily something I hear from kids and their teachers these days because they're like, well, they have regulations, they should be fine, right? But like that is media literacy. Learn how to, it's like defensive driving. You got to learn how to do things that protect yourself and your peace of mind.
Yeah, all really good points. But let's move on to our last question of the night. And again, we appreciate everybody for joining. We really have fun with these discussions. So we really appreciate you guys joining, especially last minute for tonight's Spur of the Moment Acolyte Season 2 cancellation stream. But we're going to get to Ovier de la Cruz's question, who, for those of you who didn't join last week, asked us, what are some films that we love that we would recommend for somebody trying to get into film? Obviously, you see him wearing a Godfather shirt. There's more to our interests than just Star Wars. We do love and have a passion for cinema and film. And both of us went to film school. We really we love the art of filmmaking, and we love talking about all this stuff. So we said, "Oh man, that's such a difficult question to answer. Why don't you come back this week? Let us know your favorite genres," which Ovier did let us know their favorite genre in the chats of last one and said it was thriller, mystery, and sci-fi. And also wanted to know a little bit about our anime recommendations as well. So this might be a little bit longer answer to this question. I think maybe we should go back so it's not just like one long listing. maybe we should go start with sci-fi since that's pertinent for Star Wars. Give a couple recommendations for sci-fi movies that we both really like. And since you said you like thriller mystery as well, not just because I'm on the high of Alien Romulus, but Alien is the pinnacle, seminal thriller mystery sci-fi movie. If you want horror, thriller, sci-fi, it doesn't get better than Alien, in my opinion. I absolutely love that movie. It's so perfect in every way. It has great characters and great story, great atmosphere. The sound is unbelievable. Watch it with a sound system that's good enough, or at least headphones that are good enough. Or look for maybe a local showing of the original. I'm hoping, I know they did a 45th anniversary showing early in the year, hoping maybe they'll bring it back for Halloween or closer to Halloween because Alien Romulus did pretty well in the box office. But yeah, absolutely Alien. You should definitely watch Alien. Similar vein, and I know Senec's probably going to mention this one too. The Thing. If you like horror, thriller, and sci-fi, you should watch The Thing. John Carpenter. It's an excellent movie as well. Other sci-fi you could watch that's not horror thriller related. If you're looking for things that are newer, definitely something you could go Nolan. There's Inception, there's Interstellar, there's also the current most popular sci-fi franchise, Dune. You could watch Dune Part 1 and Part 2. But yeah, if you like action, there's The Matrix and Terminator. There's so many different subgenres within the grander sci-fi genre that you could go on forever. More, kid-friendly sci-fi, family-friendly sci-fi like Close Encounters or ET. There's so many great sci-fi movies, but hopefully some of those are good places for you to start.
Yeah, no, those are great choices. I like I said, I think to learn the filmmaking, older films that have a little bit more emphasis on the practical, on the strength of performance, really does highlight the best parts about the genre. Sometimes living in a world that has so much CGI, it can kind of get muddled, and you can kind of get away with things a little bit, right? But in terms of like sci-fi, I will always say that, a film that I love even now is Inception. I think that's just a
Mhm.
great one to be like, what did I just watch? If you've never seen it before, definitely like a film that showed Nolan was capable of these majestic, huge sci-fi concepts, and not just what we got from Batman and his trilogy there. Uh, that's a perfect favorite of mine. I love Mad Max 2, especially. That's a great one
Yeah.
because you bring in a little bit of that Western feel. There is some level of just adventure and comedy that is like inescapable about being in dystopia. And it's a great like blender, quite literally, of like different things in the world and how you put it all together once there is no uniformity, right? And how you can also see that play out in the film. I think that's really great. I love Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think Spielberg is massively underrated, even though he is very rated for his sci-fi. His he still is in some ways underrated, and I think Close Encounters is one of the best examples of that because it's not like Leo mentioned with Alien and all these other sci-fi films or concepts. They tend to skew negative or like fearful or warnings. This is a film that isn't necessarily that, and even though it has a sci-fi concept, there's a lot to do with family, a lot to do with human relationships and all that. There's
Mhm.
like an optimistic tone to it that I think I really like, even more so than something like E.T., which I still think kinda is trapped in some fear to some degree, right? So, yeah, I really love Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It it's a film I've only seen once in theaters for its 40th anniversary, but it was so perfect to me. I might not ever see it again because it was just such a great experience. For like a thriller, I'll say Black Swan. That's a really good one. It just it's yeah, Aronofsky, really likes to go mess with your mind, and that is a great example of that. How you can the headspace alone can change so much about the thriller feel. Um, if you wanna see something similar to that, but in Japanese, Cure. Cure is such a strange, like, horror thriller. I don't know if Liam's seen it yet, but I told him about it. It's an insane movie. Like, I was watching it and with my friends, and we were just, like, every 20 minutes, like, "What is going on?" Like, that it was incredible, and it's so moody too. I just love the mood of that. Um,
I
yeah,
haven't seen it yet. I have the
yeah.
Criterion Blu-ray
Yeah.
sitting there waiting to watch. Maybe I'll watch it
You
tonight.
you got it. It's great. That's just a movie that makes you go like, "Man, movies," right? Like, it's so good. And then I guess for, like, mystery, I already mentioned Zodiac, but something that's, like, a little less of, like, a mystery, like, fictional film, I would say All the President's Men. I think that's actually pretty solid, and it's a great way of looking at the Watergate scandal. We are in an election season, so if you wanna get, like, a taste of, like, how media has changed, how coverage has changed around elections, how people have, like, kind of relaxed in some ways, have become tighter on, like, how we treat our politicians. It's a great story in that sense, and it's very much real. It is about things that genuinely happened and dealt with, with President Nixon and the Washington Press, right? Like, it's a really cool historic film with great performances. If you're looking for something more fun, right? Like, I'd say, the girl with the dragon tattoo, it's great too, if you wanna go for that thriller aspect that's still very grounded, and has that mystery to it. Uh, those are all great. There's one more, I'm blanking on it right now. What is a film that I would just, like, recommend? Let's see. Let me quickly look at this. Just for fun, Harold and Maude. I would say watch
Yes.
that. That's just a film that you're like, "What?" Like, it's just like, you can have fun in filmmaking. You can have just things that aren't so heavy and big, and yet they could still be so meaningful and enriching in ways that you don't expect. And, it's such a like, it's like a positive film, but it comes from, like, such a, like, strange, dark entry point, right? And it's hilarious too, which I love about that film. But yeah, I think everyone should at least see that film at least once in their life. It's so worth it, and just go in blind for sure for that film.
Mhm. One I definitely think you were, searching for there that I know you really like is Memories of Murder.
Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's a great one. Bong Joon-ho, so the guy who did Parasite, he did that one, that was one of his original thrillers. It's a great movie, definitely should check it out. Parasite, if you haven't, if you wanna watch some, good modern thriller, another great one, but if you don't like subtitles and you don't wanna read subtitles, then Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Usual Suspects, any Hitchcock, Psycho, Rear Window, North by Northwest. I think North by Northwest is like a top 3 Hitchcock. A lot of people don't talk about that one as much as they talk about Vertigo or The Birds or stuff like that, but I love North by Northwest. Another really great one. No Country for Old Men's a good thriller western. And then you asked about anime as well. The best anime thriller is Perfect Blue. That is an incredible movie. And you mentioned Black Swan, Sonic. Yeah,
yeah.
Perfect
It's
Blue has a lot
basically
of
that.
inspiration for that. So yeah, definitely watch that. Another good thriller sci-fi too is Children of Men. Absolutely love that movie. That's a masterpiece. So check that one out. But yeah, it's sometimes the lines blur between thriller and horror, because I could, throw out a lot of horror movies that I think fall under that category. It just depends what you like. One of my favorite modern thrillers is for sure Prisoners, which is a
Yeah.
Denis Villeneuve film as well. So that's another excellent one. I'm trying to think of some ones that are like less common. But the common ones are common for a reason. You got to watch them first.
Oh,
You asked for places to start. I
yeah.
think a lot of the most famous ones are great places to start. They help you get your feet wet in the genre, and then you can explore and go further beyond. I like the shout for All the President's Men. If I was going to give like one other kind of noirish thriller mystery, Touch of Evil is one of my favorites, as Orson Welles in it, who acts in it as this cop, and he is unrecognizable in the movie, and he plays this despicable cop. It is a great dark movie, one of my favorite noirs ever. So I highly recommend that as well. And then to anime, to wrap it up here, so we don't go on for this whole time. I've watched now quite a few anime series. I'm currently almost done with another one. Um, and it's just they're fun. They're a fun thing to have, especially to watch a couple episodes before bed or something. Um, I love animation and what animation does, and I've seen so many of the classic American animations throughout my life and grew up with those that it has been fun getting into anime over the last 5, 6, 7 years. But my favorite one right now, and it's one that is very popular on my anime list, but the more and more people I talk to, I say, "Have you watched this?" They haven't. And it's a real shame because Steins Gate is incredible. And if you love mystery and sci-fi, I love that show. It's so good. Sci-fi or Steins Gate, absolutely check it out. It's on Hulu right now or on Crunchyroll. I believe there's no dub though on Crunchyroll. So if you're only into dub, there is a dub, I believe, on Hulu. But yeah, Steins Gate, and you can watch it on Disney Plus too if you have the Hulu subscription with Disney Plus. So
Right.
check it out. It's so good. It's a very Nolan-esque show as well. It's kind of got that trippiness. It's about time travel, and it's got such great characters. Some of my favorite characters in any anime ever. So definitely check out Steins Gate. But there's also, the classics like Cowboy Bebop and Neon Genesis, and Death Note is still really fun if you like mystery. Right now, I'm watching a mystery one. It's kind of a grander, larger sci-fi mystery one. Almost done. It's called Code Geass, which is also very famous. So, yeah, check out any of those. I think you'll enjoy all of them.
Yeah, I'd say for the last 2 film and some anime, I would say for, like, an old thriller, crime, drama that I don't think people mention, but it's so good, Dog Day Afternoon. I really
Mm,
love that one. That's really good, and then for something modern in almost that same vein, Good Time with Robert Pattinson. That's, like, the film that, like, put him
yeah,
back on the map as like, "Oh, he's a serious actor. He's not just a Twilight guy," right? And he'd been doing a lot of great indie stuff, but that one, it's from the same people who did Uncut Gems, the Safdies, right? So it's
so
yeah,
good.
so good. I still like that a little bit more than Uncut Gems to me. I think Uncut Gems is a little messier in comparison. I like what Good Time does. There's a lot more intrigue for me there. But for anime, I used to be the one of the two of us that was much more into anime. But my peak was like when I was in high school, and I'm not going to talk about how long that's been. So, so yeah, definitely did see some more in college and all that. Like I got really into Neon Genesis, and that's just such a mind trip. It's so good. Um, but, like, other ones I would recommend, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. That one is like a mecha, but, like, not in, like, a Gundam Transformer sense. It's just insane and bizarre and fun, but then also, like, so life affirming in a way that I didn't really expect. Anytime I watch it, I just get so pumped from that. Um
It's so
also,
positive.
it's so positive. It's, like, to a fault, but then you're like, "That's what makes it so great." And I love Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I know people also love the original one, but Brotherhood's closer and more in line with the manga. It is one of the modern day classics for sure. I love Black Lagoon. I think that one's a little bit of, like, a crime noirish at times too. It's I think kind of unfinished right now. I think the manga stopped for like 8 years, but then they finally started again, and then it stopped again. I don't know, but that one's really underrated for sure. Um, I, man, I do like Psychopaths, at least the first season. I think that one is a crime thriller that is so good, and then everything afterwards is just a disappointment. It just continues to get a little bit worse and worse from what I've seen, and I just haven't ever wanted to go back into it. Kind of sucks in that sense, but that it is what it is. I haven't seen it myself, but people keep on recommending it to me. I need to see Monster. That one I heard is like a really great crime drama. If you've seen Death Note, right, it's in that same vein, but a little bit more grounded, almost as messed up, but it's also more consistent since it was never meant to be extended like the way Death Note was. Oh man, I'm trying to think of one more I could end on here. Anohana. That one is it's a different. It's got a long name. Just look up Anohan. Um, Also pretty life affirming. It kind of goes into magical realism to some degree, but it is really about relationships. It's very much a great way of seeing Japan and its beauty and like what it means to like go through mental health crises and all that, and what these relationships that you find and form say to you and what they mean to you, even if you've not been who you've always been for years and years, right? And I think that's one I saw very early, but over time, like now, like a decade plus in seeing it, it's still so memorable to me. I can't wait to rewatch it again.
Yeah, all great options. So hopefully some of those helped you out. We could go on forever. And again, I'm still not opposed to one day doing like an entire stream just about our favorite films. If there's a slow news week, definitely could do that in the future. So we'd love it if you guys brought more film questions outside of Star Wars to these streams. We could go on forever. But that's going to have to wrap up our stream this week. We even went an extra 25 minutes or so. But thank you so much for watching this week's stream. Again, make sure you join us every week. We do this every week, not just when there's a massive news story. So it looks like Monday is winning the poll. We'll see if that is the day we go with next week. We just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts. Doesn't mean it's going to be on Monday. It will ultimately kind of be whatever works best for us. But it's good to know that Monday and Tuesday are the two favorite days. So that's really helpful for us. So thank you for voting in that. Thank you for sending in your chats and your comments and everything in the chat here. We really appreciate it. And join us again next week for our next stream. And check out all the other content we have on our channel. We do have tons of videos, tons of shorts every other day. And we have polls twice a day, every day coming out. So make sure you check all that stuff out. Did just post the Legends timeline part 4, the Clone Wars, which was a massive undertaking. So if you guys want to check that out, check it out and share it with people too, because it is I think the most helpful Clone Wars timeline you can find anywhere on the internet. So make sure you check that out. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we will see you all next week for another stream.